In the heart of Europe lies a country often overlooked by the world, Moldova. Despite being on the wealthiest continent, it is Europe's poorest nation. This small, landlocked country, nestled between Romania and Ukraine, has a history marked by occupations, political turmoil, and economic hardship. Moldova became infamous for the alarming trend of locals selling their organs. This disturbing practice is merely the surface view of a deeper, darker history within a country overlooked by the affluent West. This is the unraveling story of Moldova, the poorest nation on the wealthiest continent. As the 21st century began, Moldova had suffered the most severe peacetime decline in living standards and economic output of any modern nation. In 2014, Moldova found itself at the center of one of the largest financial scandals in history when $1 billion, equivalent to an eighth of its entire economy, vanished from three of its largest banks. The mastermind behind this heist has since evaded justice, even being elected mayor of a city just north of the capital. The National Bank issued $870 million in 25-year bonds, meaning the people of Moldova, already the poorest in Europe, have been and will continue to bear the financial burden until 2039. However, Moldova wasn't always like this. Once a relatively prosperous component of the Soviet Union, it was an agricultural powerhouse that even specialized in high-tech manufacturing for aerospace and military applications. Its citizens enjoyed stable jobs, their children had access to quality education, and Moldova was even a sought-after vacation destination for Soviet elites. The situation in Bessarabia was dire even before the numerous armies that swept through the region had destroyed all infrastructure, devastated farmlands, killed half of the livestock, and displaced hundreds of thousands of families. After the war ended, the Bessarabian heartland was combined with the westernmost portion of the autonomous Moldovan Republic, known as Transnistria, forming the new Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republic. The remaining territories, considered most strategic, were allocated to the Ukrainian Republic. Moldova was not treated as a region in need of reconstruction, but as a land populated by untrustworthy Romanian sympathizers and class enemies. A shocking 13% of the entire population was eventually arrested, deported to Siberia, or executed to ensure ideological conformity. Even existing Moldovan communists were not spared from this brutal purge. Only Moldovans from Transnistria were allowed to wield significant political power as they were deemed more loyal. To further entrench control and diminish Romanian influence, a campaign to socially engineer a distinct Moldovan identity, culture, and language was initiated. The Latin alphabet was banned and replaced by Cyrillic. Private land ownership was outlawed, and farmlands were forcibly taken to establish government-controlled state farms. This, coupled with droughts in 1946 and 1947, led to the most severe famine in Moldova's history, resulting in a minimum of 115,000 fatalities by the early 1950s. As political and economic turmoil subsided, Moldova became a well-integrated part of the Soviet state. With its fertile black earth soils, the Soviets transformed Moldova into an agricultural powerhouse, pouring in capital, manpower, and technical know-how into the state farms. Output skyrocketed, and Moldova became a major producer of vegetables, fruit, canned food, wine, tobacco, and grapes. However, most new industries were situated in Transnistria, showcasing the central government's preference for those east of the Dniester River. Moldova became divided into a predominantly rural, agrarian, and Romanian-speaking Bessarabia on one side, and an urban, industrialized, and Russian-speaking Transnistria on the other. By the late 1970s, Moldova's reality began to drift from the idyllic Soviet propaganda image. Corruption, environmental issues, and the Chernobyl disaster plagued the republic. In the late 1980s, the Popular Front coalition rose in opposition to the Communist Party, demanding Soviet troop withdrawal, Moldovan sovereignty, and a return to the Latin alphabet. In 1990, the Popular Front won a majority in the Moldovan Supreme Soviet, ending the communist monopoly on power. With the Soviet Union disintegrating, Moldova declared independence on August 27, 1991. However, minority groups like the Turkic-speaking Gagauz people proclaimed their own independence from Moldova 2 months later, fearing marginalization. The Gagauz dispute was eventually settled peacefully, as the Moldovan government granted them significant autonomy. However, Transnistria, historically privileged during Soviet rule, rejected the same deal, not wanting to relinquish its political power or command economy. By 1992, sporadic military skirmishes escalated to full-on war. Initially successful Moldovan forces were pushed out from Transnistria when the former Soviet 14th Army, now under Russian control, intervened on Transnistria's behalf, ultimately forcing a ceasefire. This proved catastrophic for Moldova. The loss of Transnistria meant a significant part of its industrial base and 90% of its energy generation was gone. Worse, almost all trade infrastructure ran through Transnistria, which was now subject to blockades and economic blackmail, precisely when Moldova's economic system was becoming defunct. For the preceding 50 years, Moldova's economy hinged on exporting agricultural products to the rest of the Soviet Union while receiving cheap raw materials, fuel, and funding for public services. Upon independence and lacking substantial natural resources, Moldova could no longer obtain inputs at below-world prices. Costs for importing gasoline, natural gas, and coal surged dramatically. GDP plunged, inflation soared, exports and real wages plummeted. Government revenues evaporated, and the national debt skyrocketed, questioning Moldova's viability as an independent state. Yet, by 1994, 90% of Moldovans voted for continued independence, despite failed unification with Romania and a disintegrating economy. Initial reforms like privatization, introducing a new currency, and breaking up state farms were seen as positive steps. However, the Russian financial crisis of 1998 caused another shock, with exports to Russia collapsing by 50%. By 2000, Moldova was Europe's poorest country, with 60% of the population surviving on less than 65 cents a day. In 2001, the Communist Party regained power, aiming to realign with Russia to resolve Transnistria and improve trade terms. When that failed, they pivoted toward the EU. However, the second communist term expanded control over society, with censorship, harassment of opponents, and asset transfers to loyalists. Corruption became entrenched from the start of independence, with insiders amassing wealth while the country descended into poverty. Pro-Western parties allowed corruption to reach audacious levels, culminating in the $1 billion bank scandal in 2014, further impoverishing the population. Despite some recent anti-corruption efforts and an EU association agreement, underlying conditions have been slow to improve. Conflict in neighboring Ukraine and fears of Russian troops in Transnistria only complicate Moldova's future. Moldova has been cursed by a lack of natural resources, an unstable region, political instability, and corruption throughout its existence. Building a viable state, coherent national identity, and sustainable economies simultaneously after independence has proven an immense challenge, exacerbated by foreign intervention and exploitation by connected individuals. Overcoming its shackled history is a Herculean task for the Moldovan people.